Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. We continue on our top story, an unusual strike by Israel attacking first the Gaza Strip.
Video released by Israel's military allegedly showing the strike targeting an Islamic jihadi leader. Officials say a senior militant was killed in addition to a 5-year-old child. On top of that, at least 44 more are hurt. All of this comes on the heels of rising tensions between Israel and Islamic militants stemming from the arrest of a jihad group leader. Now the jihadists are vowing retaliation. Well, 10 people are killed in a house fire in Pennsylvania.
Welcome to the newsroom at France 24. Thank you for joining us. Our top story this hour. Israeli airstrikes have hit several sites across the Gaza Strip this Friday. The apparent target, Taseer al-Jabari, a commander of the militant group Islamic Jihad. He has been killed, and Palestinian health officials say a number of civilians have been killed as well. They've put the death toll at 10, including a 5-year-old child. Israel says 15 combatants have been killed. In response tonight, Islamic Jihad said it had fired more than 100 rockets into Israel, and rocket sirens have sounded in southern and central Israel. Jenny Shin reports.
This is the moment that the Israeli military IDF launched multiple airstrikes on a building in the Gaza Strip, achieving its mission to target a senior Palestinian Islamic Jihad commander. Ambulances rushed to the scene to tend to the dozens of civilians injured as collateral victims, as smoke poured out of the 7th floor. The Islamic Jihad militant group responded to the strikes, saying Israel had declared war against the Palestinian people.
هذا انتهاك واستخفاف بكل الجهود التي بذلت على مدار الأيام الماضية لعودة الهدوء. نحن تعاطينا إيجابا مع هذه الجهود، لكن العدو كعادته كان غادرا وقام بهذه الغارة الصهيونية الغادرة، ولذلك نحن الآن نقول بكل وضوح سنرد على هذه الجريمة بكل ما أوتينا من قوة.
Ahead of the strikes, Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz had issued a warning to Gaza militants.
לאויבינו בכלל ולראשי החמאס והג'יהאד האסלאמי אני אומר בצורה מפורשת, זמנכם קצוב, האיום יוסר בדרך זו או אחרת.
The strikes come 4 days after Israel arrested Bassam al-Sadi, a senior leader of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group, during a raid in the occupied West Bank earlier this week. Israel has since closed off all border crossings and restricted the movement of civilians living near the frontier for fear of a revenge attack from the group, which is a stronghold in Gaza.
Well, to get the perspective from Tel Aviv, earlier I spoke to the reporter Nurit Ben, who's in the city.
Some of the headlines that I believe you've seen already that have come out of there is an authorization by Defense Minister Benny Gantz of up to 25,000 military reservists. And that's not all. We've seen really full preparation mode from the Israeli government and military, with the understanding that this is not something that's going to be a few hours, but rather, at the very least, a few days. So part of that is the Iron Dome missile defense system deployed around relevant areas. That's something that we see every time a conflict like this happens, on alert for incoming rocket attacks from the Gaza Strip. Residents in all of those Gaza border communities have been asked to stay close to shelter. For them, that really, really is an important thing to follow, because for most of those people, between the time that there is a rocket siren and a rocket attack hits there, it's about 10 seconds to get to shelter. So full preparation mode. We're on alert to see, what exactly we hear from the Prime Minister, who really is at the helm at this point of his very first operation in this very kind of strange transitional period as Prime Minister. And Nadia, as your reporter, Jenny, mentioned, there is always context. Context here is key. There was that high-profile arrest about a week ago, but this also goes back a few months before that, because we saw then really a spate of very deadly attacks on Israelis, about 19 people killed, 19 Israelis killed, and Israel blames the Palestinian Islamic Jihad for that. So really since then, Israel has been sort of on the hunt for them, trying to weaken the group, trying to prevent its ability to plan and carry out attacks. Whether this will be successful in actually making that happen, that is, of course, far from clear.
The military operation named Breaking Dawn was an unusual strike from Israel, who is not likely to hit first. Bomb shelters are being prepared across the country, while 25,000 IDF reservists are also being called up to reinforce Israel's defense.
I'm Phil Gale. Welcome to the program. Dozens of rockets have been fired at Israel from the Gaza Strip. The barrage comes after Israel launched a series of strikes into Gaza earlier in the day. Israel says it was targeting the Islamic Jihad militant group and that it was eliminating what it called an imminent threat. Palestinian authorities say at least 10 people were killed and dozens more injured.
Israeli forces target an apartment building in Gaza City. Just one of many airstrikes launched into the coastal strip. Israel says the attacks were in response to an imminent threat from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group. The strikes come after Israeli forces arrested a senior militant in the West Bank early this week.
Israel carried out a precise counter-terror operation against an immediate threat. Our fight is not with the people of Gaza. Islamic Jihad is an Iranian proxy that wants to destroy the state of Israel and kill innocent Israelis. The head of Islamic Jihad is in Tehran as we speak. We will do whatever it takes to defend our people.
An Islamic Jihad commander was killed in the strikes, and the group vowed to retaliate.
This is a declaration of all-out war against the Palestinian people. We will respond to that. This is a violation and disregard for all the efforts that have been made over the past days in order to restore calm. We dealt positively with these efforts, but the enemy was, as usual, treacherous and carried out this raid. And now we clearly say that we will respond to this crime with all our might.
As a 5-year-old girl is mourned, fears of an escalation are rising. Palestinian militants fired rockets into Israel as night fell.
Well, DW's Tanya Kremer is in Jerusalem and gave me this update.
Well, air raid sirens have gone off in several communities and cities in the south and center of Israel after Palestinian militant groups retaliated with rocket barrages into the south and the center of the country. There have been interceptions by the Iron Dome, the Israeli defense system. Now, this comes, of course, as we heard also in the report, after Israel launched airstrikes into the Gaza Strip in the afternoon. So far, the health ministry in Gaza, the Palestinian health ministry, puts the numbers of 10 people killed, among them a young child and also a senior commander of the Islamic Jihad, a smaller militant faction in the Gaza Strip, which is ruled by Hamas, and over 55 people injured. But of course, we're expecting this number to rise as also Israel is continuing to carry out airstrikes, as it says, against Palestinian Jihad military targets. Now, we heard also the Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid speaking to the Israeli public and basically saying, you know, this operation will take as long as it takes. Israel has also called up 25,000 reservists from the army. They have reinforced the troops around Gaza, put, you know, the Iron Dome system and opened up bomb shelters, mainly in the areas surrounding the Gaza Strip.
Right, so this sounds like quite a significant mobilization. What more has been said about this imminent threat that Israel said it was defending itself? Why is this happening now?
Well, there has been a build-up here in tensions and threats and warnings, but there were also mediation efforts by Egypt. Now, this comes after Israel's military actually arrested a senior leader of the Islamic Jihad in the northern West Bank, in the occupied West Bank in Jenin. There have been a lot of raids in the area by the military, and Israel had said that they're anticipating some kind of retaliation by Islamic Jihad. There have been mediation efforts between the militant factions in Gaza and Israel through Egypt and other players, but it didn't seem to have made a difference right now, because then we saw these rather unexpected airstrikes by Israel on targets this afternoon on Gaza.
And you've described what sounds like a significant mobilization of Israeli forces. Does this risk escalating into another war?
Well, I think it's still too early to say whether this will be, what Israel usually calls an operation. Will it be an all-out war? Will it be days or weeks? I think the main thing here, it will be devastating for civilians that will be again caught, like multiple times. There have been 4 wars between Hamas and Israel, 4 wars on Gaza, the civilian population there. Let's not forget, this is also a small territory which has been blockaded by Israel and partly by Egypt for almost 15 years now. So for civilians there, this will be very, very difficult. There's a lot of worry as well as for civilians, of course, also in the south of Israel. They will have to stay in their bomb shelters. So there's a lot of worry among people here, what will happen here in the next hours.
Okay, thank you for that, Tanya Kramer in Jerusalem.
The military operation named Breaking Dawn was an unusual strike from Israel, who is not likely to hit first. Bomb shelters are being prepared across the country, while 25,000 IDF reservists are also being called up to reinforce Israel's defense. Welcome to the I-24 News Desk. I'm Batya Leventhal, coming to you live from Tel Aviv. We are back with our top breaking news story. The Israeli Air Force has launched an attack on the Gaza Strip. The IDF Chief of Staff, Aviv Kochavi, made the decision late Friday afternoon to launch a proactive move and attack targets of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the enclave. The military operation named Breaking Dawn was an unusual strike from Israel, who is not likely to hit first. Bomb shelters are being prepared across the country, while 25,000 IDF reservists are also being called up to reinforce Israel's defense. I-24 News correspondent Bianca Zanini breaks down the latest.
Launched an operation against Palestinian Islamic Jihad targets in the Gaza Strip this Friday. The operation, dubbed Breaking Dawn, took out senior Islamic Jihad commander Taizir Jabari, as well as other members of the group, after days of tensions across the border. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, there have been several civilian victims. The Islamic Jihad has been threatening to attack Israel in response to the arrest of its West Bank leader on Tuesday. For days, Israeli communities near the border have seen lockdowns and road closures due to the threats, and reinforcements have been sent to the border. Earlier Friday, Defense Minister Benny Gantz warned that if the threats didn't stop, Israel would take action. The IDF said 6 strikes were hit by fighter jets and armed drones in the initial attack. A special situation has been declared up to 80 kilometers from Gaza, an area which extends as far north as Tel Aviv. In a statement, Prime Minister Yair Lapid said that the goal of the operation is to eliminate a concrete threat against the citizens of Israel. The IDF is targeting specific targets of the Islamic Jihad who vowed retaliation. Hamas, which rules Gaza, quickly announced its support for the group and said it would respond to the Israeli airstrikes. Israel releasing a message in Arabic speaking directly to Hamas and the residents of the Gaza Strip.
Residents of Gaza, in the last 4 days, the terrorist organization Palestinian Islamic Jihad insisted on carrying out an attack against the state of Israel without caring about the security and civilian consequences for the residents of the Gaza Strip. The responsibility is of Hamas. Who does it care more about, the residents of Gaza or uncontrolled organizations?
I-24 News defense correspondent Jonathan Regev joins us now live from the Zikim junction near the Gaza border. Jonathan, there's just been a meeting that is wrapped up at the security headquarters here in Tel Aviv, a security consultation that took place with both the Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz and the Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid. We know the meeting has wrapped up, but nothing likely coming out of it just yet in terms of their reaction. Are we seeing anything new near the border? Has there been more reinforcement there? We know 25,000 reservists are being called up.
Yes, exactly. We've not seen a lot of reinforcements coming down in the past few hours, simply because many reinforcements have been sent here for the past 3 days since those roads have been closed on Tuesday. Therefore, the IDF is ready with a very strong presence here on the border already. The big question now, and basically what will determine how this operation will continue, is what will happen from Gaza, how the reaction will come from there. Yes, it's been a little more than 4 hours since the operation began, and it has been pretty much quiet on the Israeli border side of the border since. We heard reports perhaps of attempted mortar shells, but nothing serious. But no one in Israel lives under the illusion that this will go on for a long time. There are expectations, assumptions that some kind of response will come from Gaza. What kind of response? That's the big question, and who will be the organization behind it? The Islamic Jihad will respond one way or another. Will Hamas join them? That is a very big question, and of course it will determine the course of this operation. Why so? Hamas is an organization much bigger, much stronger than the Islamic Jihad. If Israel conducts an operation only against the Islamic Jihad, that is one thing. An operation against both of these organizations is another thing. And basically, Israel is still trying to understand what kind of response we will see from Gaza. There are constant drones and IEDs and UAVs in the skies over Gaza, trying to detect every squad that is trying to fire rockets towards Israel, trying to thwart them before they're able to fire rockets into Israel. A lot of effort is put into that, and yet it is quite clear that some sort of response from the Islamic Jihad will come. They cannot go by this, let this go by with no response. What kind of response? How tough will it be? And what will be the organizations participating in that response? These are the big questions that will determine how this operation will look from now and days to come.
Right, Jonathan, and just extremely briefly, you mentioned that the reservists have already been stationed on the border for the last few days. 25,000 reservists being deployed now. Can you explain a little bit to our viewers exactly what that means? Are they likely to head to the border? And what does it mean necessarily to be a reservist at a time like this when tensions are through the roof with the Gaza enclave?
It basically means that you leave everything. You leave your family, you leave your job, and you go to your military post. This is a time of high tension, and the reservists, up until the age of 40, usually the military service, unless you're an officer, it ends at the age of 21, 22, and yet people can be called to reserve duty up until the age of 40, and even more than that. Most of the people that are called now are mostly called for aerial defense being mostly Iron Dome. Iron Dome batteries are deployed all over southern Israel, here at the Gaza border, in cities a bit further away like Ashdod and Beersheba, and also in central Israel in the area of Tel Aviv, and even further to the north. The aerial defense, the concern is that it will have to be active all the time in the coming days, and that is why you need all the personnel possible to man these positions. This is why these people have been called mainly for aerial defense, not so many fighting positions, but mostly aerial defense. At least for now, the assumption is that this operation will not include a ground incursion, but these kind of operations, as always, you know how they begin, you never ever know how they end.
Thank you, Jonathan. And moving now just to our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osuran, who joins us now from Tel Aviv. Ariel, I believe you have an update for us regarding the Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Well, yes, Batia. Currently in Gaza, all armed factions are meeting together in the shared operations room. We're talking about not just PIJ, but also Hamas, as well as other factions. And this meeting is still going on, and we have already heard, though, that the factions together had promised that there will be a response. Now, an IDF official tells me this evening that the PIJ is preparing to fire rockets onto the center of Israel. That would obviously include Tel Aviv and other large cities in the area. And they're also trying to convince Hamas to take part in their retaliation. Now, Jonathan just raised the question whether Hamas will get involved or not. So we know that the PIJ is trying to apply pressure on Hamas to get involved in this, and their level of involvement will determine how big this round of escalation ends up being. And this comes amid the preparation of the IDF that it is prepared for any response, the official says. And of course, this comes as they have begun mobilizing reserve forces, 25,000 of them.
Right, Ariel, and between you and Jonathan Regev, our resident, I'd like to say Hezbollah experts as well, we are hearing comments coming out of the Lebanese group. We're also hearing reports that Al-Quds operatives, Iran's Al-Quds operatives, were also targeted in the strike. How likely are we to see a broader operation here, or is it going to be specifically targeted at the PIJ?
Well, we need to see how things are developing on the ground. As of now, the only targets that the IDF has officially targeted were PIJ targets. They're leaving Hamas out of this, which makes it more convenient for Hamas to take a back seat on this, if you will. Hezbollah is constantly involved in communications and doesn't miss an opportunity to voice its response in light of attacks like this. They've done that. The Iranians, the foreign ministry has also condemned, as well as the Qataris. And so there are a lot of comments coming up.
Right. Thank you, Ariel, Middle East correspondent, for wrapping that down. We'll be back. The military operation named Breaking Dawn was an unusual strike from Israel, who is not likely to hit first. Bomb shelters are being prepared across the country, while 25,000 IDF reservists are also being called up to reinforce Israel's defense. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. We continue on our top story, an unusual strike by Israel attacking first the Gaza Strip. And breaking that down, joins me now in studio Rafael Yerushalmi, a former senior intelligence officer at the IDF. My first question to you, 25,000 reservists are potentially being called up. This really is quite a large number. Does that mean that we're expecting quite a large response?
So first of all, it's an impressive number, and it should be, because it sends a very strong signal to the other side. By now, the terrorists have understood how determined the political level is this time. It's quite new in Israel that we are proactive to that extent, and that we strike first, and that we strike hard, and also that we call so many reservists. We want to send a strong signal, an impressive signal to the enemy by calling these reservists. Now, these reservists will be needed, because you have to remember that the people on the ground right now, from the Air Force, from the infantry, have been on a high alert for 4 days, consecutive days. They've been preparing secretly their operation, and they've started the operation, so that sooner or later they will have to rest and to be replaced by fresher troops. So we will need these reinforcements. I just want to specify that these 25,000 people are not yet all called. The political level has given the authorization to raise 25,000 reservists. It doesn't mean they will all come tonight. Some will probably arrive in the next hours. It takes up to 24 hours. It's a very well-oiled machine. By the time they receive their convocation to come to the front, there is a head of a group. He will call all the people of his group to make sure that they come to a meeting point. From that meeting point, they will go to their units. So that's very well oiled. It takes a few hours. Now, these 25,000 will not not arrive tonight. Some will arrive later, some might not also not arrive according to the developments. But in any case, there is such a strong determination this time that we do hope, because we've never really tried it that way, that it might discourage the Islamic Jihad from continuing, but it might also be the contrary effect. It might make them be afraid to lose face, that they have to react, they have to at least send a few missiles to say that they fought back. And the Hamas, the question mark of will the Hamas join or not join, is not such a big question mark, because for now the Hamas is not interested in escalation, but eventually it will have to join in. It will have no choice than joining in, because it certainly doesn't want the Islamic Jihad to cover itself with glory while the Hamas sits aside doing nothing. That's not possible. Plus, in any case, they are also to follow the orders coming from Tehran, and Tehran already gave the green light to the Islamic Jihad. They gave the green light to last week to the Hezbollah to send drones attacking our platforms for natural gas. So there's a lot of green lights there, and the Hamas will also get a green light from Tehran.
Right, and I want to touch on that a little bit more. I want to bring into the conversation our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran, who joins us from Tel Aviv. Ariel, hearing reports that it's not just the head of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the commander Taseer Jabari, but senior officials in the organization were also supposedly taken out. And this also comes amid statements that are going to be delivered a little later by the Israeli Prime Minister and possibly the Defense Minister. Are they likely to bring this up?
Well, indeed, not just Taseer Jabari was targeted. He's the commander of the Quds Brigade Northern Division in Gaza, but as well, another target was Abdallah Qassoum, the commander of the Quds Brigade Anti-Tank Guided Missiles Division in Northern Gaza. And this points to how Israel was preparing and was following PIJ's steps, how they would expect to retaliate. The southern part of Israel, the communities around the Gaza Strip have been pretty much under siege for the past 4 days out of fear that this will be the PIJ's response to the arrest of a senior official in the West Bank earlier this week. And in fact, the military acknowledged that it had stopped at the beginning of this operation. Not only did it kill Jabari, but it also thwarted 2 anti-tank guided missile units that were on their way, that were preparing to target Israelis. Now, the assessment in Israel is that they would not just target Israeli soldiers, but also Israeli civilians, hence the closures of streets in the area surrounding Gaza. And so it appears to have been, if we look at how this plan was implemented, large fire force, concentration of fire in a short period of time. This could only come in a premeditated operation that was planned, or what's called a drawer operation, with plans prepared in advance. And given this these tensions that have been along the Gaza border for the past few days, and also in light of internal Israeli criticism, how could so many people be under siege when not even a single rocket had been fired? And so this appears to have been the response planned all along, and Israel took the preemptive strike before these 2 anti-tank missiles were able to carry out their attack on Israeli targets.
And to that exact point, Ariel, you mentioned that this was supposedly in defense of the residents in the south, but residents are also relatively angry at the moment that they have been under lockdown for 4 days. Benny Gantz, the defense minister, made a comment where he said that they won't allow terror groups to dictate the agenda for Israeli border towns. But with a preemptive strike like this, naming of an operation, is it not likely that this is going to continue for a few more days? How are residents meant to feel?
Well, the IDF is acknowledging that this won't be a matter of hours, but a matter of days. This, I think, calls back, rounds of escalation are kind of like the tide. They ebb and they flow throughout the years. Now, most of the operations Israel has conducted in Gaza was against Hamas. But if we trying to see what this is more similar to, I would liken it more to the operation in 2019 that took out Baha Abul Ata. He was actually the predecessor of Taysir Jabari, the commander of PIJ in the northern Gaza Strip. He was seen by Israel as an element of that pushed forward a lot of escalatory actions against Israel, a lot of rockets fired at his direction. He was taken out, and for a few ensuing days, there was a limited operation. The way the Israeli military is framing it now, it's trying to put it in those terms. But again, where this will lead to, the extent of the escalation will again be determined by the involvement of Hamas, whether it will take a back seat on this, or will it fire on its own rockets? If it fires rockets of its own, then Israel will retaliate on striking Hamas outposts. Now, in the past, even when there was what's called rogue element rocket fire from Gaza, Israel would respond against Hamas targets, saying that Hamas is responsible for what's happening in the Gaza Strip. That is not the case that we're seeing today. Today, even though it wasn't Hamas that was firing, Hamas sites are not being targeted, which allows them to take a back seat on this. And so, again, their decision, what will come out of this faction meeting in Gaza this evening, will give us an indication what we should expect in these coming days.
Ariel, stay with us. I want to just bring Rafael Yerushalmi into the conversation here. Hamas has made a first statement since the Palestinian Islamic Jihad commander's killing, saying that they, quote, "The blood of our people and resistance are not shed in vain." And currently there are live images over the Tel Aviv boardwalk. Are we likely to see an attack, a retaliatory strike in Tel Aviv?
It's definitely a possibility, and Israel is bracing itself for it. The instructions of the internal front command are very clear. We're talking of a broad line of 80 kilometers from the border of Gaza inside Israel that is like on alert. 40 kilometers are more in danger from the border of Gaza, meaning to the Palmahim beach, which is a very popular beach. Like tomorrow should have been full of people. So tomorrow it would be nice for the turtles and they'll have some quiet. 40 kilometers of with the Iron Dome and people being near shelters. The other 40 kilometers to 80, that's like not to have a lot of outdoor gatherings of a large amount of people. Even the chief rabbi of Israel said it's okay to pray at home, not to go to the synagogue. So we are bracing ourselves for it. The biggest ally of the IDF is the Israeli population, because the Israelis are not so disciplined. You see them on airplanes or how they drive. But when it comes to a conflict, they would be absolutely disciplined, and they are the biggest ally of the IDF because they will follow the instructions. They will go to the shelters. They will lie down next to the cars, including little children, including old people. That is very important psychologically for our troops to know that at the back people are doing the job too. So this is very important. What is now the unknown is also on the Israeli side, because this Prime Minister Lapid and the Chief of Staff and GANTZ, the Minister of Defense and the Chief of Staff, they've changed in one day a lot of parameters that we were used to. This is a very unusual round. So to what extent are they changing those parameters? To what extent the doctrine has changed up at the top in the Israeli government? Until now, the preceding governments were seeing the Hamas as not to be pushed too much because they thought it was a good thing to rule, to divide and rule. Like it's good that the Palestinians should be divided, the PLO in Ramallah, the Hamas in Gaza, it's a good thing. Right now, it's not so sure it's such a good thing with all the attacks, terrorist attacks that have ensued. So is there here a very deep change in the policy of Israel, or is it just a momentary change because of the public opinion pressure from the south? let us remind everybody that the citizens of the south of Israel were always ready to take the chances of a bigger conflict. They were always praying, asking the government to go much further, much stronger. They don't care if they have to be in shelters. They don't care if missiles will be thrown at them. They want a real solution to this problem that has been lasting for so many years.
I want to actually talk to you exactly about that before we end the broadcast in just 2 minutes' time. But there is an unusual difference here. We are looking at pictures coming from the boardwalk in Tel Aviv. People are going about their evening, walking around, coming back from restaurants. This is not the same situation that we are seeing in the south. Does that have something to do with how long it takes to get to a shelter, or based on what you said, that they are likely looking for a bigger conflict to end once and for all the escalations, unlike the residents of Tel Aviv?
Yeah, well, first of all, you have to see that Tel Aviv is an urban area. So if you're not next to a shelter or you're not at home, you can always go inside a building, in a restaurant. I witnessed once on Rothschild in a coffee shop. People were in the coffee shop and there was an alert and everybody went towards the toilets in the kitchen. So and you can also be between two buildings. I mean, you're not in the open, so it's easier to find a hiding place. Also, of course, psychologically, and the instructions of the home front are clear. We are at the 80 kilometer, between 40 and 80 kilometers, and so we feel less threatened. My daughter, for instance, and my grandchildren are tonight in Ashdod. They're going to have their usual Saturday night dinner. There is some kind of anxiety, especially among the children. On the other hand, the Israelis also have this optimism, and they believe in their fate that we will prevail. And up till now, thank God, there were very few casualties on our side.
Rafael Yerushalmi, former senior intelligence officer at the IDF, thank you so much for your insight. The military operation named Breaking Dawn was an unusual strike from Israel, who is not likely to hit first. Bomb shelters are being prepared across the country, while 25,000 IDF reservists are also being called up to reinforce Israel's defense.
First, beyond our borders tonight, Palestinian officials say Israeli airstrikes in Gaza have killed at least 9 people, including a senior militant, and wounding another 40. Israel says it was targeting the Islamic Jihad militant group. There are growing fears the escalation could lead the sides closer to an all-out war. Chile's Easter Island is receiving tourists once again after closing its borders more than 2 years ago due to the pandemic. The tourist destination, over 2,000 miles from the coast of Chile, has over 1,000 infamous stone statues of giant heads carved centuries ago. Visitors, as you can well imagine, have to be fully vaccinated and present a negative COVID test before traveling to the island. Just some of the other stories from beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back.
The military operation named Breaking Dawn was an unusual strike from Israel, who is not likely to hit first. Bomb shelters are being prepared across the country, while 25,000 IDF reservists are also being called up to reinforce Israel's defense. It's an unusual strike from Israel, who is not likely to hit first. It's an unusual strike from Israel, who is not likely to hit first. It's an unusual strike from Israel, who is not likely to hit first. It's an unusual strike from Israel, who is not likely to hit first. It's an unusual strike from Israel, who is not likely to hit first. It's an unusual strike from Israel, who is not likely to hit first. It's an unusual strike from Israel, who is not likely to hit first.